To the north of Cape Verde Islands, they met with the great masses of floating seaweed. They were the tropic grape which grows on the submarine rocks. Only from the equator to the 40th degree of north and south of latitude. From the 22nd degree of latitude, they found the surface of the sea covered with flying fish, which threw themselves up into the air 12, 15, or 18 feet and fell down on the dock. From the time they entered the torrid zone, they were never weary of admiring at night the beauty of the southern sky, which, as they advanced to the south, opened new constellations to their view. We feel, says Humboldt, writing of himself at that time, we feel an indescribable sensation on approaching the equator, and particularly on passing from one hemisphere to the other. We see those stars progressively we have contemplated from our infancy, progressively sink and finally disappear. Nothing awakens in the traveler a livelier remembrance of the immense distance by which he is separated from this country than the aspect of an unknown firmament, the grouping of the stars and of the first magnitude, some scattered nebula rivaling in splendor the Milky Way, and tracts of space remarkable for their extreme blackness, give a peculiar physiognomy to the southern sky. This sight fills with admiration even those who, uninstructed in the several branches of physical science, feel the same emotion of delight in the contemplation of the heavenly vault. As in the view of a beautiful landscape on a majestic site, a traveler needs not to be a botanist to recognize the torrid zone by mere aspect of its vegetation. Without having acquired any notions of astronomy, without any acquaintance with their celestial charts of Hampstead and de la Calle, he feels he is not in Europe when he sees the immense constellation of the Ship or the phosphorescent clouds of Magellan arise on the horizon. The heavens and the earth, everything in the equinoctial regions, presents an exotic character. The lower regions of the air were loaded with vapors for some days. They saw distinctly for the first time the Southern Cross only on the night of the 4th of July in the 16th degree of latitude. It was strongly inclined and appeared from time to time between the clouds, and the center of which, furrowed by uncondensed lightings, reflected a silvery light. The pleasures the travelers felt on discovering the Southern Cross was warmly shared by the crew who had visited the colonies. In the solitude of the seas, we hail a star as a friend from whom we have long been separated. The Portuguese and the Spaniards are peculiarly susceptible to this feeling. A religious sentiment attaches them to this constellation, by the form of which recalls the sign of the faith planted by their ancestors in the deserts of the New World. The two great stars from which mark the summit and the foot of the cross having nearly the same right ascension, it follows that the constellation is almost perpendicular at the moment when it passes the meridian. The circumstances is known to the people of every nation situated beyond the tropics or in the southern hemisphere. It has been observed that at what hour of the night in different seasons the cross is erect or inclined. It is a timepiece which advances very regularly, nearly 4 minutes a day, and no other group of stars affords to the naked eye an observation of time so easily made. Often afterward did Humboldt and Bonpland hear their guides exclaim in the savannas of Venezuela, or in the desert extending from Lima to Truxillo. Midnight is past, and the cross begins to bend. It reminded them of the affecting scene where Paul and Virginia, seated near the source of the river of Lantagners conversed together for the last time, from where the old man at the sight of the Southern Cross warned them that this which was time to separate. The last day of their passage was not so felicitous as the mildness of the climate and the calmness of the ocean had led them to hope. The dangers of the sea did not disturb them, but the germs of the malignant fever became manifest on board the Pizarro. As they drew near the Antilles between decks, the ship was excessively hot and very much crowded. From the time they passed the tropic, their thermometer stood at 93 or 97 degrees. Two sailors, several passengers, two blacks from the coast of Guinea, and a mulatto child were attacked with a disorder which appeared to be endemic. On morning of the 13th, Highland was seen from the masthead, though not clearly, so it was surrounded by a thick fog. The wind blew hard, and the sea was very rough. Large drops of rain fell at intervals, and every indication meant tempestuous weather. When the sun rose, the fog cleared away. They saw the island of Tobago. It was a heap of rocks clearly cultivated. The dazzling whiteness to the stone formed an agreeable contrast to the verdure of some scattered tufts of trees. Syndylic and very lofty cactuses crowned the tops of the mountains and gave a peculiar physiognomy to the landscape. The wind slackened after sunset, and the clouds disappeared as the moon reached the zenith. The number of falling stars was considerable on this and the following nights. The malady which had broken out on board the Pizarro had made rapid progress from the time when they approached the coast of terra firma, but having nearly reached the end of their voyage, they flattered themselves that all who were sick could be restored to health as soon as they could land them on the land of Santa Margareta or the port of Cumana. This hope was not destined to be realized. The youngest of the passengers attacked with a malignant fever fell victim to the disease. He was an Austrian, 19 years of age, the only son of a poor widow. Several circumstances rendered the death of this young man affecting. He had embarked against his own inclination, and his mother, whom had hoped to assist by the produce of his efforts, had made a sacrifice of her affection in the hope of securing the fortune of her son by sending him to the colonies to a rich relation who had resided at the island of Cuba. This unfortunate young man expired on the third day of his illness, having fallen from the beginning into a lethargic state, interrupted only by fits of delirium. Other Asturian, still younger, did not leave for one moment the bed of his dying friend. Still, he did not contract the disorder. Humboldt and Bonpland assembled on the deck, absorbed in the melancholy reflections. It was no longer doubtful that the fever which raged on board had assumed within the last few days a fatal aspect. Their eyes were fixed on a hilly and desert coast, on which the moon from time to time shed her light athwart the clouds. The sea, gently agitated, emitted a feeble phosphoric light. Nothing was heard but the monotonous cry of a few large seabirds flying towards the shore. A profound calm reigned over these solitary regions, but the calm of nature was in discordance with the painful feelings by which they were oppressed. About 8 o'clock, the dead man's knell slowly tolled. The sailors suspended their labors and threw themselves on their knees to offer a momentary prayer. All were united in one common sorrow for a misfortune which was felt to be common to all. The corpse was brought upon deck during the night, but the priest entreated that it might not be committed to waves till after sunrise, that the last rites might be performed according to the usage of the Romish Church. They were not an individual on board who did not deplore the death of the young man, whom they had beheld but a few days before, full of cheerfulness and health. Most of the passengers considered the vessel infected and resolved to leave her at the moment that she might touch. Among these were Humboldt and Bonpland. It was not that they feared the fever, but not wishing to visit Mexico until they had made some sojourn on the coasts of Venezuela and Paria, they thought it would be best to land at Cumana. Humboldt was anxious to behold in the native sites the beautiful tropic plants which had been seen in the conservatory at Vienna. On the morning of the 15th, they perceived a very low inlet covered with very sandy downs, on which they could discover with their glasses no trace of habitation or culture. Cylindrical cactuses rose here and there in form and candelabra. The soil, almost destitute of vegetation, seemed to have a waving motion in consequence of the extraordinary refraction from which the rays of the sun underwent in traversing the strata of air. In contact with the plain slowly heated, under every zone, desert and sandy shores might appear like agitated sea from the effect of the mirage. The coasts had seen at a distance, they were like clouds in which the observer met the form of the objects that occupied his imagination. The bearings of the vessel which they had to consult, the crew and some passengers were lost in vain conjectures. Some took molds of sand for Indian huts, and pointed out to the place where they alleged the fort of Pampatar was situated. Others saw herds of goats that were common in the dry valley of St. John, or desired the lofty mountains of Macano, which seemed to them partly hidden by the clouds. The captain resolved to send a pilot on shore, and the men were preparing to get on the longboat, which 2 canoes were perceived sailing along the coast. The vessel fired a gun as a signal for them and hoisted Spanish colors. They drew near with distrust. These canoes, like all those in use among the natives, were constructed of a single trunk of tree. In each canoe there were 18 Guayqueria Indians, naked to the waist, and of very tall stature. They had the appearance of great muscular strength, and the color of their skin was something between brown and copper color. Seen at a distance, standing motionless and projected on the horizon, they might have taken for statues of bronze. They were near enough for those on board that the Pizarro to hail them, which they did in Spanish. They threw off their mistrust and came on board. They left the port of Cumana, they said, during the night, and were going in search of timber to the cedar forest, which extended from Cape San Jose to beyond the north mouth of Rio Pano. They gave Humboldt some fresh coconuts and some beautifully colored fish. What riches to his eyes were contained in the canoes of these poor Indians! Broad spreading leaves covered with branches of plantains, the scaly cuirasses of an armadillo, the fruit of the calabash tree used as a cup by the natives. Productions common in the cabinet of Europe had a peculiar charm for them, because they reminded him that, having reached the torrid zone, they had attained the end to which his wishes had been so long directed. The master of one of the canoes came on board as pilot, and the Pizarro weighed anchor toward evening. They came in sight to the little island of Cubagua. formerly celebrated for its pearl fisheries, but now entirely deserted. There being but little wind, however, the captain stood on and on till daybreak. Humboldt and Bonpland passed a part of the night on deck, conversing with the Indian pilots respecting the animals and plants of his country. At daybreak on the 16th of July, 1799, 41 days after the departure of Corunna, they beheld the verdant coast of picturesque aspect. The mountains of the New Venezuela, half veiled by mist, bounded by her horizon to the south. The city of Cumana and its castle appeared between groups of cocoa trees. They anchored in the port about 9 in the morning. The sick dragged themselves on deck to enjoy the sight of a land which was to put an end to their suffering. The eyes of the naturalists were fixed on the groups of cocoa trees which bordered the river. Their trunks, more than 60 feet high, towered over every object in the landscape. The plain was covered with tufts of cassia, caper, and arborescent mimosas, which spread their branches in the form of an umbrella. The pinnated leaves of the palms were conspicuous on the azure sky, the clearness of which was unsullied by any trace of vapor. The tree was ascending rapidly towards the zenith. A dazzling light was spread through the air along with the whitish hills which strewed with cactuses, and over a sea ever calm, the shores of which were peopled with brown pelicans, egrets, and flamingos. The splendor of the day, the vivid coloring of the vegetable world, the forms of the plants, the varied plumage of the birds, everything was stamped with the grand character of nature in the equatorial regions.